Hi everyone, my name is Scott Bono. Welcome to the channel. In today's episode, we are going to be recreating Name by the Goo Goo Dolls. Let's get into it. Name was the breakout single for the Goo Goo Dolls. It was really the song that put them on the map globally. It was recorded for their album A Boy Named Goo. It was written by lead singer and guitar player Johnny Resnick, recorded in 1994 and released in early 1995. Name is the only ballad on A Boy Named Goo. The rest of the songs on that record are mostly sort of power pop and pop punk. And the lyrics are deeply personal. They harken back to Resnick's own childhood when he was orphaned at age 15, as well as the complicated relationship he was in at that point with then MTV VJ Kennedy. Name is maybe my favorite ballad of the grunge era. It's simple, it's stripped down, it's a very delicate composition, but it still manages to carry a ton of emotion and power. And today we're going to be breaking down the top 5 things that I think really make Name work so well, and we're going to start with number 5, the tuning. It's impossible to talk about Name without talking about the distinctive tuning. The official tuning for Name is D-A-E, A-E-E, and when he plays it, Johnny Resnick actually uses 2 high E strings in both the E and B string slot because trying to tune that B string up to an E would usually just result in the string breaking. While this tuning is essentially just an open A tuning, from what I could discover, it's really the only song that was written using this tuning, and that actually speaks a little bit to the history of how this tuning came about. Johnny Resnick was simply playing with the tuning pegs on the guitar and playing around until he found something that sounded good. The melody and the progression of the song came out organically as he was playing with the tuning, and the rest is history. For my version of the song, I made 2 slight alterations to the tuning. First, I dropped the entire tuning down by a half step. The highest note in the song is an E, which is exactly where my voice breaks, and while I feel pretty confident in hitting that E flat, I can't quite hit that E, so bringing it down by a half step just made it a little bit easier for me to sing. And second, I slightly amended the tuning to D-A-E, A-A-E. So instead of doubling up on that high E string, I'm instead doubling up on the A. This doesn't have a significant impact on the way that the song sounds or plays, but it did allow me to play the song without having to restring my guitar to have 2 high E strings on it. Let's take a quick listen to the tuning and hear what it sounds like. All right, so here is what this tuning sounds like open up. And again, this is my version of the tuning down a half step and with that A-A-E at the bottom instead of A-E-E. So a very cool, unique, and distinct sound, and you can kind of hear exactly how the melody comes out of it. So while that tuning does sound really neat, it does create some limitations in the song, since basically what's going to sound best in that tuning is something that's going to be in an open A key. This informs the melody, which, while really great, can come off in repetitive, so they had to find something to make sure that that repetition didn't make the song collapse and come off as boring. And this is where number 4 on our list of things that make Name work so well comes in, and that is the arrangement. Name is, at its heart, a very simple song. There's really only 2 sections to the song, and for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call the first the verse and the second the pre-chorus, since there isn't really a proper chorus section to the song. The verse pattern is what the song opens up with. It's that signature riff that really defines the song. Let's take a quick listen to it. So that's the verse pattern of the song, first with the guitars just by itself, and then with the bass and drums as they come in. The drums are playing a simple basic rock beat with a kick on the 1 and the 3, the snare on the 2 and the 4, and a closed hi-hat sound. So after the verses, the pre-chorus pattern kicks in, and this is a strummed descending riff. You'll hear the drums pick up, the bass gets a little bit more active, and overall the song becomes a little bit more energetic. Let's take a quick listen.
Tell them your name.
after the pre-chorus, as you just heard, there's that little bit of a break where all the instrumentation drops out. There's that one little line, and I won't tell him your name. And then from there, the song either turns right back around into the verse or goes into the guitar solo, depending on where we are in the song. Because of the tuning, literally every chord in the song is droning on those high A and E strings. It's really just the bass notes that are moving around, and that's why the arrangement is so critical in making Name work. Basically, all of the movement and dynamics comes from the arrangement. So let's take a look at what I mean. The verse hook is great, but it's extremely repetitive. It's basically the same picking pattern and the same notes over and over again, repeated for 8 bars, with just the root note, the bass note in each one of those movements moving around. And again, all of those chords are droning on those open A and E strings, so this is going to get really repetitive really quickly, but this is where the arrangement comes to the rescue. First, in the intro, the guitars are present just for the first pass through the arrangement, and then before any vocals come in, the entire band comes in. So you've got the bass and the drums adding, again, playing exactly that same pattern, but not getting repetitive, because first we had just those dry guitars, and then we've got the band in play. And this is where the vocals come in. And this is great because the vocal melody is great. The lyrics are simple and intimate and relatable. But by the third line of the verse, things are starting to get repetitive here as well. And this is again where the arrangement steps in. Unlike most songs, particularly most ballads that have verses that are either 2 lines or 4 lines, here the verses are only 3 lines long. Let's take a quick listen again to the top of the song with these things in mind. We're going to start right from the very intro so you can hear just those dry guitars and hear it build. So here, the band comes in. Bass, drums, percussion, everything together. Same pattern, but feels different. And when that's getting boring, here come the vocals.
The moment passed me by, still can't turn away.
First line of the lyrics.
All the dreams you never thought you'd lose, you tossed along the way.
Line number 2, and we're headed into the final line number 3.
The letters that you never meant to send, you lost or thrown away.
So now when things are starting to feel a little bit repetitive, even with the vocals following that same kind of vocal melody, we change things up and we kick into the pre-chorus.
Now we're grown-up orphans that never knew their names.
And now the dynamics completely change. The drums are bigger, the bass is moving around a bunch, the percussion changes, and the vocal melody changes. So we were getting a little bit stale, a little bit repetitive, things change, the arrangement comes to the rescue, and we've got a more dynamic song with, again, basic, simple building blocks. And then as we get to the end of the pre-chorus, we get that signature line. Take a listen.
And I won't tell no one your name. And I won't tell them your name.
And that gives us a clean break between the pre-chorus and, in this case, the start of verse 2. As we head into the second verse, you've got basically the same pattern as you have in the first verse. There's some slight variation in the vocal line to give things a little bit of a sense of change from the first verse, and then we head back into the second pre-chorus. Okay, so after the second verse and after the second pre-chorus, we have that signature line of, and I won't tell no one your name, where the song collapses a little bit, and then it heads back into another verse pattern. This time, though, it goes into an extended post-chorus sequence with Johnny droning on that line about, and I won't tell him your name, several times. Rather than heading into a third down verse here, however, we head into the guitar solo, which is the highest and most upbeat part of the song. Let's take a quick listen to those two transitions. Here we are exiting the second pre-chorus, heading into that extended post-chorus.
And I won't tell no one your name. And I won't tell them your name. And I won't tell them your name.
Okay, so here in the post-chorus is where we would have picked up and gone into a new verse the first time around. Instead, we stay down for one more pass through the riff here. Take a quick listen. And so from there, it's right into the guitar solo. The guitar solo is up. It's the most upbeat and energetic portion of the song. It actually continues on for a good little while. The guitar solo itself gives the song a nice little shot of energy, basically exactly where it needs it. I love the guitar solo of this song, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I wanted to point one other thing out about the guitar solo as it pertains to the arrangement of the song. The guitar solo itself is fairly long and actually gets a little bit repetitive and dull itself. And so there's something that really interesting that happens at the end of the solo where the drummer changes up the percussion arrangement a little bit. I'm going to play this for you here and see if you can hear it. So did you catch that change there? For the first half, almost 2/3 of the guitar solo, the drummer, who's playing a more upbeat beat now, is mostly playing on a fairly open hi-hat type of sound for the right hand. But towards the tail end of the solo, there's a nice little fill that he does. And then after the fill, he goes to that open ride sound. And so now we've got a little bit more of an open ride sound rather than that closed hi-hat. Just gives a little bit of a dynamic change to the song, really kind of helps bring the solo to its crescendo. And then the solo itself ends and falls off a cliff as we head into the final down verse. Just super cool. I love the way that all of those pieces work together. It really makes Name sound great. So as the solo finishes, the song falls off into one more break. And at this time, the break is a little bit more extended, gives the song just a moment to breathe before it heads into the third abbreviated verse. The final verse follows much the same pattern as the first two, but for a few things. First, it's just the guitar and the vocal. Second, it's truncated, so it's only about half the length. And third, it's a very delicate and fragile verse. The guitar is played a little bit more hesitantly, and the vocals are almost whispered. And finally, at the very end, it resolves on a little bit of a variation of the original verse pattern. I'll let you listen to that third verse now.
Think about you all the time, but I don't need to say. It's lonely where you are, come back down, and I won't tell them your name.
The arrangement here is doing all the heavy lifting and turns what is a simple hook into an enduring grunge ballad that I think is still relevant even almost 30 years later. And one of the reasons that this works so well is actually number 3 on our list today, and that is all of the little details. With Name being such a simple song and the arrangement admittedly doing a lot of the work to make it so impactful, one of the things that really helps add up and create a sense of complexity and dynamics in the song are all the little details placed throughout the song. One good example of this are a few spots where there are additional guitar parts that are added in, particularly in the pre-chorus. They add a little bit of additional texture and a little bit of sonic variety on top of all those chords that are droning on those open A and E strings. Let's take a listen to a couple of those now. So I'm going to play you a little section of the beginning of the pre-chorus with the vocals muted, just the guitars, bass, and drums, so you can hear what some of those little accent guitars are doing. Take a quick listen. And here's with just the guitar soloed through that same section. Just that little bit of additional instrumentation there really adds a lot of value to the song. It makes it sound a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting, again, cuts down on that repetition. There's another variation on this. It's done in verse 2 as well. Very much the same thing with a slight variation in the chord progression. But the last thing that I wanted to show you on this was one little spot of one little guitar that's added right at the top of that third very fragile verse. I'm going to play it soloed for you now so that you can hear it, and then I'll play it in the context of the mix so you can get the full sense of the impact. Just that one little accent guitar playing those 3 strummed lines adds a ton to the song. Let's take a listen to it entirely in context.
Think about you all the time, but I don't need the same.
It's simple and it's subtle, but it just adds a nice little piece to that very delicate and fragile part at the end. Just really great attention to detail. Another good example of where details matter is in the percussion. There is a shaker and a tambourine. It's adding a little bit of texture and glue to the overall percussion. We'll take a listen to it here with just the drums, percussion, and bass soloed so you can get a sense for what's there. And here's that same section without the percussion so you can get a sense for what it's doing. I'll toggle it in and out so you can hear throughout. Here's without. And here's the percussion in. So obviously that's subtle, but it definitely makes a big difference, particularly in the overall context of the mix. And the last thing here is as we head into the chorus, the tambourine kicks up quite a bit to keep pace with the change in dynamics for the rest of the song. Take a listen. Again, just the drums, percussion, and bass soloed here. Again, just adding a little bit to the overall dynamics of the song, creates a little bit of glue in the percussion part of the song, and it sounds great. Really great attention to detail. And this brings us to number 2 on our list of things that make Name work so well, and that is the rhythm section. If you're not familiar, the rhythm section of a band generally refers to the drums, percussion, and the bass. At its core, Name is a simple acoustic guitar-based ballad. It probably works really well as just a solo acoustic guitar song, as I know that it was played at countless open mic nights across all of the US and probably the world through a good chunk of the 90s, something I'm personally probably guilty of having done a few times myself. Anyway, the point is that, strictly speaking, Name doesn't really need a rhythm section. It works just fine as an acoustic guitar ballad with a great arrangement, great vocals, and that killer guitar hook. But in this case, I think what the rhythm section does is perfect, and it really takes Name from being a cool singer-songwriter acoustic guitar ballad to an all-time grunge ballad anthem. And that's because the rhythm section in this case does exactly what the song needs, and that is almost nothing interesting at all. So let me explain what I mean by that. Because the hook and the vocals are so compelling in this song, and because of all of the restrictions with that tuning, all those droning A and E strings, the bass and drums and percussion need to be drop dead simple. Anything else is going to wind up being a distraction from the song. Putting it another way, the bass and drums, they need to serve the needs of the song, and that's exactly what they do here by being very simple supporting characters, really helping elevate the overall song from its acoustic foundation to this anthemic ballad that's still relevant almost 30 years later. The bass helps to anchor the chord movement of the guitars by basically doubling what the root note in the guitar is doing through the verses, and then getting a little bit more active during the choruses and the solo. Take a quick listen to what I mean. Here's the bass and the guitars soloed. So just the same kind of root note pattern that the guitar is following, the bass is doubling. And as we head into the chorus, you can hear things get a little bit more active. Let's take a listen. Again, very simple, nothing flashy, but exactly what the song needs. And the drums are doing something very similar, just that simple basic rock beat with the kick on the 1 and the 3, the snare on the 2 and the 4 throughout the verses, and then a double time feel as we kick from the verses into the choruses. I'll play a little bit of the verse into that chorus pattern here so that you can get a sense for what the drums are doing. Again, very simple, nothing flashy, but it's doing exactly what the song needs to take it from here at the verses up to here in those pre-choruses. Just absolutely perfect work by the rhythm section. Before we move on to number one on our list today, I want to give a quick honorable mention to the guitar solo. This has got to be the best, essentially single string guitar solo certainly in grunge history, I would imagine. And I remember as a kid trying to learn how to play this guitar solo, thinking that it was basically impossible. And I can certainly report as an adult now, having tried to figure it out, it's really hard to figure out exactly what he plays on the record. And in fact, I couldn't find a take of Johnny Resnick playing this live where he actually plays the solo live the same way that he does on the record. As an aside, there are a ton of tutorials on YouTube that show how to play the guitar solo, and I don't think any of them are right. There are a few spots that were different or wrong in every single one of the ones that I found. Mine is, I think, very close. There's one or two spots where I made some very slight deviations from the solo, but if you're interested in getting a quick guitar lesson on how I tapped out the solo for this song, please let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll put together a video for that. And finally, for number one on our list today of things that make Name work so well, what else could it be but the hook? So in my opinion, Name has maybe the best acoustic guitar-based hook from any song in the 1990s. It really utilizes that unique open A tuning in an amazing way and crafts a very compelling song out of a basic and simple idea, and in a tuning that itself is pretty limited. So let's take a listen to it and break it down. So here's that pattern. I'll play through it one time really quickly. So very simple strumming pattern the entire time. Really, the root note is the only thing that's changing in the first half of the hook. And after that first part of the hook, you have this little ascending riff that turns it around a little bit. So you can hear the A and E strings just ringing throughout all of this, whether it's the descending part or it's the ascending part. Altogether, just an absolutely iconic and anthemic hook as a part of one of the best ballads to come out of the 90s. Okay, so now that we have broken the song down, it's time to put it back together. Let's go over what it took to recreate my faithful cover of Name. Let's start with the acoustic guitars. For this song, I played my Taylor 214, which you just saw, and I used a 3-mic setup when I was recording. I used a pair of Earthworks TC20 small diaphragm condenser microphones for the close mics on the guitar, and then I used my Aston Origin, which is another condenser microphone, in the room to give a little space and ambiance. I used Paul David's acoustic miking trick. I'll put a link to his video in the description below, where I placed the 2 close mics about 2 feet away from the guitar, one pointed at the saddle of the guitar and one pointed at the 12th fret. The room mic was about 6 feet away and it was centered directly in front of the sound hole. Since I was using multiple mics, I had to make sure that there weren't any phase correlation issues here. I tried to do that as best that I could when I was recording the guitars, but I did nudge them just a little bit once I got them into Logic to make sure that everything was in phase. Ultimately, I recorded 3 different takes of the acoustic guitars, 2 of which are panned hard and left and present throughout the song, and the third I used for texture to add a little bit more fullness during the choruses and underneath the solo. That one's panned center up the middle, but a little bit buried in the mix. For those accent guitars, I recorded them separately and layered them on top of the main acoustic guitars. It sounds to me like in the album version, Johnny actually plays those live with the main rhythm guitars, but I couldn't figure out how to do it and make it sound good, so I figured I would just do the overdub in and mix them, and I was pretty happy with how that came out. Once I had the tracking done for each one of those guitars, I submixed those 3 individual guitar mics down into one stereo mix. This involved a little bit of EQ, a little bit of a use of a preamp plugin, and I used a little bit of reverb and created some stereo imaging in each one of those tracks just to give the guitars a nice full sound, and that's what you wind up hearing in the final mix. For those that are curious, the signal chain that I ran that through was a Neve 1073 preamp plugin emulation into a Pultec EQP 1A style tube compressor plugin, into an LA 2A compressor, and then finally into an Empirical Labs distressor compressor. Okay, let's talk about the bass. The bass, as we covered here, is really simple. It's the simplest bass part of any of the songs that I've done so far in this series. It wasn't really all that complicated to figure out. I'm not very much of a bass player myself, and it took a little bit of work to try to get everything in time, especially during the choruses where there's a little bit more movement, but after a few takes was able to get something that I think worked pretty well. As usual, I recorded the bass through both a Rupert Neve DI as well as a Sansamp preamp, and then just blended the two of those textures in the mix till I found something that worked for the song. As for the vocals are pretty straightforward on Name. There's just a single vocal track. There's no harmonies or anything like that. It sounds a little bit on the record like Johnny may have double tracked at certain parts, but I didn't do that for my version of the song. The only real change here from what's on the album version, again, is I brought the entire song down by a half step just to make sure that it was within my fairly limited vocal range. Lastly, for the drums and percussion, as we discussed earlier, the drums and percussion are really critical to anchoring the song and really taking it to the next level. As always, my friend and collaborator Eric Herbranson recorded the drums and did a really outstanding job on this. We recorded both the drums and the percussion acoustic live. And I think that makes Name the first song in this series where I haven't used any kind of simulation at all. No guitar amp simulation, no bass simulation, and no drum simulation or electronic drums at all. Not exactly pure analog, but it's as close as I'm gonna come these days. And that's it. That's my attempt at faithfully recreating Name by the Goo Goo Dolls. I know I say this at the end of every single one of these, but this was an absolute blast to learn and record. As always, thanks to my friend Eric Herbranson for providing the drums and percussion, and you can take a listen to the final product of this at soundcloud.com/ScottBono. As usual, I've got several other projects that I'm working on right now, so stay tuned for those as well. And in addition to the songs that I'm working on for other parts of the Recreating series, I've got another huge and frankly kind of ridiculous project that I've been working on with some friends and collaborators for the last very many months that's finally starting to come to fruition. I'll have a little bit more to share on that really soon, including a collaboration with someone that I'm really excited to be able to share with you, so please stay tuned for that. If you're interested in seeing more content like this, I've got several other Recreating episodes up on the channel, so please do feel free to take a look at that. And if you've enjoyed what you've seen today and feel like giving a like or clicking that subscribe button, it really helps the channel. As always, I've been Scott Bono, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.